30 guns were already loose in their jackets when the sound hit the room. Not a shot. Worse, a mistake that couldn't be taken back. No exits, no backup. One man standing where apologies don't exist, and everyone waiting to see if he'd be breathing in the next 10 seconds. That decision hadn't been made yet. Chicago didn't belong to the law in 1930. It belonged to one man, and everyone in the city knew his weight. Phones rang when he wanted them to. Badges bent when he leaned. Courtrooms tilted in his favor before anyone spoke. If you challenged him, the lake swallowed your name. Power like that changes a man. It teaches him the world will move when he says so. That night, he was seated in his city, at his table, surrounded by men who'd kill without asking why. And across from him sat someone who wasn't supposed to say no to anything. The man from New York didn't look impressed. Lucky Luciano had learned early that noise attracts bullets. He moved differently, quiet, watching, letting other men bleed for their pride while he counted angles. By 33, he wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, wasn't sentimental. He was building something clean under something dirty. Money before ego, structure before chaos, partners instead of blood oaths. That was the problem. The old bosses didn't understand him, and Chicago didn't trust what it didn't own. When the invitation came, it didn't come with threats. Those were implied: thick paper, careful ink, a date, a place, dinner, the kind of politeness that precedes a burial. Lansky saw it first. Read it once. Then again, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. You go out there, he said. You don't come back unless he wants you to. Luciano didn't argue. He folded the card like it mattered, like it was already history. Chicago wasn't asking. Chicago was checking. March 8th, train west. No gun, no entourage, just a tailored suit and the kind of calm that only comes when you've already accepted how it might end. Men who fear death don't travel that light. The restaurant used to belong to someone else. Everyone knew what happened to him. That was part of the Dacre now. Velvet seats, soft lighting. The kind of place where deals were sealed quietly and bodies were remembered loudly. They searched Luciano at the door, found nothing. That worried them more than a weapon. Inside, the room wasn't full of diners. It was full of intent. Men positioned to see every movement, hands close to where decisions lived. Nobody smiling except the man at the center. Capone stood when Luciano entered, a show, a test. The handshake lingered half a second longer than it needed to. Strength answered strength. They sat. Wine was poured. Luciano waited. Let the other man drink first. Always let the other man drink first. Capone noticed, filed it away. Small talk floated across the table. Trains, weather, nothing real. Real things come later. Then the air shifted. The smile stayed, but the room leaned in. This city you're running, Capone said, almost kindly, it's being wasted. Luciano didn't interrupt. Silence makes men talk. You're boxed in by old thinking, Capone continued. Old men, old rules, I don't have that problem. There it was, the offer that wasn't an offer, Chicago muscle, Chicago reach, Chicago control, and in return New York would bend, 60-40. The numbers hung there waiting to be accepted like gravity. Luciano lifted his glass, took a small sip, set it down gently. No. The word didn't echo, it detonated, chairs shifted, jackets moved. 30 men leaned forward without being told to. Capone's smile cracked just enough to show what lived underneath. This isn't a discussion, he said. Luciano leaned back, unbothered, explained calmly why wars were bad for money, why New York wasn't built like Chicago, why forcing control would cost more than it earned. And then he said it again, slower, no. That's when Capone stood. And when Capone stood, everyone stood. The room tightened. The kind of tight that smells like metal and sweat. The kind that ends careers and families. Capone's voice filled the space, not loud, certain, reminding everyone who owned what. Luciano rose too. That was the second mistake no one expected. He didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't back away, he stepped forward, one step, then another. 30 guns adjusted their aim. Capone watched him approach, confusion bleeding into fury. Close enough now to see the scar lines, close enough to feel the heat. Luciano stopped, looked up, and lifted his hand. The room didn't breathe. It happened faster than thought, slower than regret. Skin met skin with a crack so sharp it cut through crystal and velvet and reputation. Not a punch, not a shove, an open hand, clean, final, the kind of contact that doesn't aim to injure, only to insult in the deepest way possible. Capone's head snapped sideways. That sound wasn't violence, it was blasphemy. Every man in the room moved at once and not at all. Guns cleared leather halfway. Fingers found triggers. Eyes locked on a single unarmed body standing too close to a dead man who hadn't realized it yet. Capone didn't reach for pain. He reached for disbelief. Nobody touched him like that, ever. Not in public, not in private, not breathing afterward. Luciano didn't retreat, didn't apologize, didn't even square his shoulders. He stood there exactly where he'd chosen to stand, as if this had always been the plan and everything else had just been a warm-up. Capone's hand hovered at his waist. His face drained of color, not from fear of injury, but from the shock of something snapping inside him. Authority relies on inevitability. That slap questioned it. 30 men waited for the word. They didn't need instructions. They needed permission. Luciano spoke before the room could decide for him. "Do it," he said quietly. No tremor, no rush. Right now or sit back down. No pleading. No bargaining. The sentence wasn't survival instinct. It was a dare. If Capone pulled that gun, he'd be killing an unarmed man in his own dining room in front of witnesses who'd never forget it. He'd win the moment and lose something else, something harder to replace. Respect built on fear cracks when it looks panicked. The silence stretched. Seconds piled up, each one heavier than the last. Capone's chest rose and fell, his jaw tightened. He stared at Luciano like he was trying to find the trick, the wire, the angle he'd missed. Then he laughed. It wasn't relief. It was recognition, a deep sound, genuine, the kind that comes when you finally see the board clearly. He stepped back. Let his hand fall away from the gun. The room hesitated. "Put them away," Capone said. No one moved. His voice hardened. "Now." 30 guns disappeared as if they'd never existed. Capone wiped his cheek with his thumb, looked at it, smiled crooked. "You got nerve," he said. "I'll give you that." He gestured to the table. The power shifted back into the furniture, chairs scraped. Breath returned. Luciano sat without ceremony. So did Capone. What followed wasn't shouting, it wasn't threats, it was quieter than that, dangerous in a different way. Two men speaking the same language without translators, territory defined, boundaries respected, percentages adjusted until they made sense. Equal weight, equal silence. No one else spoke, no one else mattered. By the time Luciano stood to leave, nothing in the room looked the same. Capone offered his hand again. This time it wasn't a test. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware it had just been spared a war. Inside, a story had been born, and it was already spreading. Because when word reached New York, it didn't sound like bravery. It sounded like a warning, and the men who thought they owned Luciano were about to realize something was slipping out of their hands. By morning, the story had already changed shape. It never traveled straight. It bent to fit whoever was telling it. Some said Luciano screamed. Others said Capone swung first. None of that mattered. What mattered was the part that stayed the same every time. He walked out alive. In rooms where men measured power by body counts, that detail landed heavy. Phones rang across state lines. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Names were spoken softer. In New York, the old bosses didn't laugh when they heard it. Mafia called for him first. No shouting. No accusations. Just that slow stare from behind a desk that had seen too many betrayals to trust coincidence. "You touched him," Mafia said. "Luciano didn't deny it. And he let you leave." Luciano nodded once. That silence afterward was worse than anger, because Mafia understood leverage, he understood fear, and he understood when something stopped belonging to him. Across town, Maranzano reacted differently. Disbelief first, then denial. Then confirmation from Chicago that tightened his jaw. He didn't summon Luciano, he watched him quietly. Like a man realizing the knife he'd sharpened might already be pointed his way. Luciano felt it, he always did. The respect from Chicago had changed the math. Men who once dismissed him now listened. Men who once gave orders now asked questions. Not openly, not yet, but power moves before it announces itself. What Capone had seen that night wasn't courage, it was finality. A man who'd already decided how far he was willing to go. That kind of man doesn't stay under anyone for long. Within months, alliances shifted without signatures. Meetings happened without invitations. Names were removed from conversations entirely. Luciano didn't rush it. Rushing makes noise. He let the tension grow. Let paranoia do the work for him. Because the most dangerous thing in the underworld isn't violence. It's certainty, and both old bosses had just realized the same thing. Charlie Luciano wasn't asking permission anymore. The first boss died thinking he was still in control. Mafia trusted routine. Same lunch spot, same table, same sense that loyalty was permanent if you paid for it long enough. He didn't see the trap because it didn't feel like one. No raised voices, no sudden moves, just another meal with a man he believed belonged to him. Luciano excused himself halfway through, quiet, polite, like he'd done 100 times before. When he came back, the room felt different. Gunfire doesn't echo the way people imagine. It's sharper, meaner, final. By the time Mafia understood what was happening, his world had already ended. Bullets tore through the illusion of safety, through power that thought it had time. Luciano didn't look back. When the police asked questions later, he gave them nothing to hold. No panic, no story, just a calm certainty that he hadn't seen a thing worth mentioning. The underworld understood the message immediately. One boss gone, one left. Maranzano moved fast after that, too fast. He crowned himself, declared victory, surrounded himself with ceremony and titles like armor. He thought structure meant safety. Thought tradition would protect him from a man who'd already broken every rule that mattered. He was wrong. Luciano let him settle into comfort. Let him believe the danger had passed. Let him think the slap in Chicago was just bravado, not a warning. Then he sent men who didn't look like killers. They didn't come dressed for war. They came looking official, calm, professional. By the time Maranzano realized who they weren't, it was already too late. Steel flashed, shots followed, and the last old world boss fell under a ceiling he thought made him untouchable. 2 thrones empty. And Luciano standing where no one had expected him to be. But power doesn't stabilize immediately after blood. It shakes, it tests, and every man left alive was watching the same question form in the dark. If he could do that to them, what would he do to us? Luciano didn't rush to fill the silence. That was the mistake everyone expected him to make. Step into the light, claim the crown, start issuing orders like the men before him. That's how bosses used to die. Instead, he disappeared just enough to let the city breathe wrong. Meetings happened without a single head at the table. Decisions were made collectively but guided. Nobody could quite point to where the pressure came from, only that it was there. Subtle, persistent, inescapable. Men who once fought over scraps now found their disputes settled before bullets were drawn. Territories stayed where they were told to stay. Money moved cleaner, faster. Fewer bodies meant fewer problems. They called it cooperation. Luciano called it insulation. Behind the scenes, he built something no one had seen before. A structure where no single man could pull the whole thing down. A system where ego was expensive and silence was rewarded. Ethnicity didn't matter. Loyalty wasn't inherited. Results were everything. Power stopped screaming. It started calculating. The old-timers hated it. They felt useless without vendettas to settle, without blood to prove devotion. But they stayed quiet. Because every time someone tested the new order, the response came swiftly and without drama. No warnings, no speeches, just absence. Chicago watched from a distance. Capone kept his word, stayed in his lane, but he paid attention. He defelt it that night in the restaurant. That moment when the slap landed wasn't about disrespect. It was about a man announcing he couldn't be owned. Years later, when the heat closed in and cells replaced offices, that night still followed Luciano. Reporters asked about it. Guards whispered about it. Prison walls couldn't keep legends from growing. He never embellished it. No bravado, no myth-making, just the lesson. Fear is natural, control is optional. And when a man decides he's already made peace with the worst outcome, there's nothing left to threaten him with. That's when power changes hands. That's when the guns lower. That's when empires quietly change owners.